I want us to begin today back in 1967 in Atlanta at the height of the civil rights movement. Coretta Scott King, the wife of Martin Luther King Jr., was looking for a theater for her children to participate in, a theater school. And she went from one place to another asking if her daughters would be welcomed in the theater school, and heard again and again, no, they cannot attend here. And it was because the girls were black. But Coretta didn't give up. She eventually found another school called the Actors and Writers Workshop. It was a little place run by two truly starving artists, Walter and Betty Lou. And when Coretta approached Betty Lou and said, "Can I bring my daughters here?" Betty Lou said, "Of course, we would love to have them. Bring them over right now." Now, it is that picture of extravagant welcome that I want us all to focus on today as we look at our nativity story with new eyes. It is that extravagant welcome that travels all the way through our Hebrew Bible and into our New Testament text. And it is a theme that we need to keep front and center as we read about this nativity of Jesus. Now, in our reading, we're in the Gospel of Luke, and I only want us to concentrate on just one line out of that whole text that Linda read for us. And the line said that Mary gave birth, wrapped her child in cloth, and laid him in a manger, because there was no room in the inn. Now, friends, I'm going to ruin Christmas for you just a little bit today, because there was no inn. There was no inn. There was no place where you could go and give money to stay in a room for the night. Where would Joseph have gone if he went back to his hometown? Where would you go if you went back to your hometown? Maybe you would go to family. You would go to the home of relatives and see if you could stay with them. And they would welcome you with open arms the same way that Betty Lou welcomed the King children. Now, the word here in Greek for inn is actually a word that does not mean inn at all. It is kataluma, and it means guest room. It is a guest room in a home. Now, there is a word for inn. Jesus uses that word when he talks about the Good Samaritan. But that's not the word here. The word kataluma means guest room. Now, I have a picture that Patrick is going to show for us for just a couple of minutes here. And this is what a Palestinian home would have looked like at that time. There is a family living space. This is all one structure, one level, with a flat roof. We have a family living room. We have one side of this room or this home that is for animals. The animals came into the home at night. And on the far side, on the other side of this house, is a place called the kataluma. And this is the guest room. Hospitality was mandatory. You had to have a place for guests to stay. Why was it that important? Because there are no Motel 6s with the lights on. There's no Marriotts. There's no Ramada Inns. There is no place to go. If you're traveling and you don't have a place like this to stay, if you don't have a family that opens their arms to you, you will not survive. There's no refrigeration. There's no automobiles. There's no way for you to live unless someone gives you hospitality. Thank you, Patrick. Now, the mangers are dividing this area for the animals and the area for the people, right? So the mangers are right there in the living room. So what did Luke say in our reading today? He described that Mary gave birth, wrapped the child, and laid him in the manger. Where's the manger? Right in the living room. That's where Mary and Joseph were. They couldn't stay in the kataluma because it was already full of other travelers. Other family members had arrived before them. So when they came to the home of relatives and said, "We need a place to stay," the kataluma was full. So you have to stay right here in the living room with all of us. So where do we get the picture of that barn? The stable. Did anybody hear the word stable in Linda's reading this morning? No, it's not there. We live in the West, and many places in Europe were like this as well. The stable was non-existent in Israel. People's animals stayed in with them at night. Nobody had a barn. If you were going to lay a baby in a manger, you were doing it in your living room. So this is a Western idea, because where do we keep our farm animals, if we have any? Do you keep them in your living room? Didn't think so. You keep them in the barn. That's where the manger is. But people in Palestine did not. The manger was generally a couple of carved stones. They were smoothed out, grooved out, made a perfect bassinet. And that's where the animals came to eat. And they were right there in the room. So we have this idea that Jesus was born with just Mary and Joseph all alone in a barn, away from everyone, in isolation. But what does Emmanuel mean? God with us, God right here in the messiness of our life, right in our living room. That's where Jesus was born. What a change when we put ourselves back into the culture and the time when all of this happened. So Mary and Joseph show up at Joseph's relatives, and even if he didn't know them well, how many of you have relatives you haven't seen in years and years, you would still go to them. And you would say, I am so-and-so, and I am part of a family, and they would welcome you immediately, because that's what they did. Hospitality. It's part of our biblical story, and it tells us who we are. So Mary and Joseph show up, and she is heavily pregnant, and they say, well, the Cataluma is filled, but you can stay right here. And they welcomed her in. Now back in Atlanta, Betty Lou is also expecting. During the months of her pregnancy, she has formed a friendship. She and Walter and the King family. They are friends. And when she gives birth to a little girl, the Kings are notified. They know that there's a new baby in the family of Walter and Betty Lou. So they also find out that Walter and Betty Lou, being the starving artists that they are, cannot pay the hospital bill. So the King family stepped in, and they paid the bill in full. Now think about this for a minute. It's the height of the civil rights movement. White people are doing unspeakable things to their black neighbors. And Martin Luther King and Coretta Scott King paid the hospital bill for a little white baby, for a poor white family. That is extravagant welcome. That is generous abundance. And that is the kind of welcome that Jesus would have received. He wasn't born in a hospital. But you can imagine a house overflowing with family, with all kinds of commotion. And Mary goes into labor. What happens? The women here know. We would have gone immediately to her. The women would have known how to help her. She's a teenage mother. They would have surrounded her. Conversation and cooking and the sounds of animals would have been all around, and with it would have been this group of women around Mary. Maybe they went to get a midwife to come and help. But they would have been supporting her, holding her together, telling her to breathe and push, and breathe and push. Now, I'm going to ask Calvary Brass to help me here. Can somebody reach into that stable and hand me Mary? Don't worry, she won't bite. Just reach in there. There she is. Yeah, this is definitely not Joseph. Okay. Here's what we think of when we picture Mary, right? She looks perfect. She looks serene. She has beautiful, clean clothes. She's always robed with light blue and white. This one has a little bit of peachy color, I imagine, just the reflection of the radiance of the moment. And she looks serene. She even has lipstick on. All right. Have you all ever seen a woman after she has given birth? Because this is not it. Birth is messy, and it is bloody, and it is sweaty, and it is dangerous, and it is hard work, and it is exhausting. So even though Luke mentions that the baby is born, and she wraps the baby in swaddling clothes, he misses the most important part of it, the labor that it takes. So I want you just to keep in mind that this is not what Mary looked like at all. She probably looked and felt like she'd been run over by a camel, because I know what that feels like. She would have been exhausted. And when that baby was born, there would have been other hands there to clean that infant, to help her wrap this baby. She's a child herself. How does she know how to do this? Because there are other women helping her. We'll put Mary right there. And then they pass that child around. There's a whole room full of people. Can you imagine giving birth in a room full of people? Can you imagine being in the room with a woman giving birth? I bet some people just got out of there, right? But once the baby is there, we're going to pass that child around and say, Joseph, it's a boy. You've got a son. Congratulations. And they would have laid that child in the manger, which, remember, it's not in the barn. It's in the living room. Extravagant welcome. Mary being cared for. None of this isolated out in a cold barn, but in the middle of a family. Emmanuel, right? God with us. Now, the next part of the story is my favorite part because of those shepherds. Let's remember that Martin Luther King Jr. was the face and the leader of the civil rights movement, but also, first and foremost, a pastor, a minister. And his church, his flock, was far beyond the walls of the building where he gave his messages. He had a vision of the beloved community, the flock of God's sheep that was huge and expansive. Didn't matter if you were important or if you were no one special. Didn't matter if you were old or young or male or female or black or white. This beloved community was everyone, every last one of us. And who does the message of this divine birth go to? The shepherds out on the hillside. Those angels did not show up for the governor of Syria. They did not show up in the palace of Herod the Great. They did not show up for Caesar Augustus, nor were they at Mar-a-Lago or anywhere else where important people gather. They were outside, right above the folks who work so hard, who do so much for us. People who work hard every day with little or no recognition for little or no money. That's who the shepherds represent. Think about this. Who serves your food when you go through the drive-thru? They are the shepherds. Who is washing the dishes? Who is the short order cook? Who's the bank teller? Who's the person that's shoveling the asphalt into the potholes in the road? Who is driving the trash truck, the garbage truck? Those are the folks who we often say are not so special, and yet they are the ones that the angels appear to. They are the ones that receive the message because they're still out working. They're outside. They were low in their social status. Shepherds did not mingle well with the rest of the folks. They smelled like sheep and they lived outside, right? But they heard the message and they responded. And it is the same message that we hear again and again and again, that Christ is born. Go find Christ. Go look. Don't wait for somebody to appear in the living room. Go find the Christ child yourself. And they did. And it was exactly as the angels had said, right? Here's the baby lying in a manger. We know who Mary is because she's the only exhausted teenager in the room. And here's Joseph. We're going to pat him on the back and say, you've got a son. And the shepherds marveled. But did they know? Do you think that the shepherds could possibly have known what this child would go on to accomplish? Could they have known that that little baby boy was going to change the world? Could they have known the influence he would have in his life? I don't think they could have known. Just as Martin Luther King Jr. could not have known the influence that little baby girl would have. She was only a few months old, probably just learning how to sit up when Martin Luther King Jr. was murdered. But Coretta Scott King, she saw that baby grow up. And Yolanda King, she knew who that baby was. And they saw her as she grew up and changed and became a very influential person. Just as Jesus was born in someone's living room, this woman has been in all of yours. She's been on your TV. You've seen her in movies like Erin Brockovich and Pretty Woman. That baby is Julia Roberts. Martin Luther King and Coretta Scott King paid for her hospital bills when she was born. That is extravagant welcome. Now this week, we are all going to have the opportunity to be welcoming, and when our relatives are filling our house and driving us crazy. Or nuts, Ryan, thank you. Or when we're at home alone with nothing but our memories. Let's think about this idea that Jesus was not born in isolation, but was born in the middle of a messy family in the living room. And let's imagine for a moment what it would feel like in our homes if Christ was born in ours. How would that look? How does that change the nativity story for you? That there's no inn, and there's no innkeeper, and there's no stable, and there isn't even a donkey. But don't tell donkey that yet. We'll save that for next Christmas. This year, let's think about this extravagant welcome. The welcome this baby would have received, the welcome a little white baby received, and the welcome that we all give to one another. That is the true story of the Nativity.